Welcome to the Infamous Storyteller podcast. We're on chapter 10 of Moonless. I'm Adam. We have Joe, who is narrating, and then we have
Hi.
Shayla and Brandon. Well, shall we begin?
I believe there's nothing holding us back except our own will.
Let's do it.
Except fear itself.
That's what flat earthers are afraid of. It's fear itself. Okay. Chapter 10. Settling in.
Sorry. That was a pretty good joke.
Thank you. It wasn't mine.
I
Clarence
figured.
spent his days working with Ulrich, his evenings putting his cabinet together. Cabin. On Good Angel's
Cabinet.
Day. Cabin.
Yeah, it says cabin. Read it
Cabin.
right.
My bad. I like to sleep in a cabin in the woods.
I
On
can't
Good
read.
Angel's Day, Sunday for all intents and purposes, he would join the choir for their after-service practices. He didn't particularly like it, but it turned on with some coaching. It turned out with some coaching from Constance, he didn't sound too bad. It was likely a good thing. He's going to be singing or chanting quite a lot, so the sound should be at least bearable. The one good thing about choir practice was that Piper was there. It's a win. Solid.
Is that a win?
It's a win.
We'll find out.
Hey, no spoilers. Clarence walked over to her where she was gathering the hymn books from the other choir members as they walked by. Clarence handed his over. How was the service today? He didn't know why he asked. It wasn't like he was planning on attending. It was very nice. Wish you would have come. She smiled at him, hefting the hymn books in her arms. Clarence shrugged. I've been busy. Want to give me the rundown? She raised an eyebrow, taking a hymn book from another choir member. We read of the Great Divide, when the good angel called the Titan eels from the depths to separate the continents from one another. Huh. Why'd she do that? Clarence asked. To prevent war from her peoples. Before the eels were called from the depths, the slender ones were crossing over the seas, conquering land after land, murdering and enslaving her other peoples. The great prophet called on her to intercede on the world's behalf. She wasn't going to help without being asked first? Seems a little harsh to me. The story did sound like something the woman who brought him here would do. She'd probably have forgotten all about the eels or just never noticed they were a problem. It's important to ask for things, Piper chided. It's the one way we interact with the good angel, and her with us. If that was true, why did she feel at liberty to rip him from his home out of nowhere? He had said a few prayers in his life, but not to the good angel. For a decent father, for his mother to stop drinking. His prayers had all been answered when his grandfather picked him up in that old Ford. What are you thinking, Clarence? Piper asked, noticing his loss of focus. Nothing important. Want to go on a walk through town? She took the last hymn book and looked at him. I don't know, Clarence. I'm pretty busy. Oh? Clarence shuffled his feet. I might be able to make an exception this week, but it will cost you. She gave him a shy smile. Cost me what? What could she want? Come to services next week, Piper asked. Clarence thought it over. The meeting was only a couple hours. He didn't want to go, but it seemed fair. Maybe it would help make up for his blunder in the bog. I suppose I can make that work. You suppose? Piper questioned. I mean, I'm more than willing to move things around to make that work. She smiled at him. You'd do that for me? Seems like the gentlemanly thing to do. Fair trade as well, he noted. Piper's smile widened and she handed him the stack of hymn books. I would say it's more than fair. Clarence headed off to put them back on their shelves, grinning to himself. As he started to place the books down, he heard someone call his name. Turning, still smiling, he saw the priest walking over to him. He was a frail-looking man, but he moved with the youthfulness of a child, eyes just as bright. Clarence! Clarence! I don't know what
Just
he
old
said
skinny
brightly.
guy.
He's an old skinny guy.
Yeah.
Is he like an old skinny guy?
He's
An old
like
skinny
an
guy.
old skinny guy.
Is he like
Like very happy to see you,
like very
Clarence.
happy to see you? Hello. Oh, this voice sounds really familiar. Clarence, he said brightly, putting a fatherly hand on Clarence's shoulder. Just wanted to take the opportunity to tell you how grateful I am for the help that you've been providing the good angel, and for your time in constructing the new wing for her church. Gives me something to do, and you seem to need it, Clarence stated awkwardly, shuffling where he stood. Well, the good angel blesses those who serve her and her people. I heard you were working on a cabin in the bog. Rough place to live. But that doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, we would like to take tomorrow off from building the church and help in your cabin's construction. I've talked to the men in the congregation, and we would be more than willing to help you. Clarence didn't know what to say, and had to take a moment to consider. It would be rude to decline the offer to help, and honestly, he could use it. He would need to hide his blood nymph. That is an incredibly generous offer. Tell you what, I'll spend this week after work gathering the wood for the cabin walls. We can spend the first half of the day on my cabin, then we can finish out the day's work on the church. Does that work for you? If that's what you want, we are more than able to make that happen. We could help you get to the roof we could help you get the roof up as well. One day not working on the good angel's church is no sin, the priest chuckled. Stacking logs is the hardest part. I can put the roof on and stuff. The cracks easily enough.
And stuff the cracks.
I can put the roof on and stuff the cracks easily enough on my own. That's perfect then, the priest grinned. Been a while since I've been in the bog. Did I ever hear you mention, Piper, that you will be attending this coming Sunday? Slide, dog. Okay. Clarence fought his urge to frown.
Throw up.
Clarence fought his urge to... He didn't want to set the expectation that he would be coming regularly, or even just for a pretty face, even though he was. Even if that was exactly what he was doing. Man, I'm prophetic. I did, Clarence said hesitantly. Good. If you have any questions about the sermon, I am happy to sit down and discuss them with you. I may take you up on that offer. We'll see. No worry, my young friend. It's all in the good angel's time. And with another gentle squeeze, the priest strolled off, heading back over to speak with Dyron, his wife and children. Clarence finished stacking the books. The offered help was a generous one. He knew that the men had little free time between their own work and building the new church wing. While he was fairly certain it was all part of Piper's plan to make a religious man out of him, he caught himself smiling as he finished his work. As he exited the building, he was pleased to see Piper standing off to the side. Her pretty blue eyes lit up when she saw him, and he couldn't help but grin back. She stepped up to him, her hand held above her eyes to shield them from the sun. The walk through town is all that you had planned? I did have something else in mind, Clarence admitted. Not sure how interested you would be, but I made a couple of fishing poles. Thought it might be fun to see what we could catch off the mill. She perked up, eyes shining. That sounds fine. We should swing by the apothecary first, though. I'll need to grab my apron and change into something more fitting for fish slime. The walk to the apothecary was quick, and Clarence waited outside the main room, looking around as Piper changed. He ran his fingers down the table where he'd lain, and his shoulder twinged a bit at the memory. He rubbed his shoulder out and turned in time to see Weaver Constance walk in from the back. She smiled at him warmly. Clarence, you're sounding much better. I knew you'd have a nice voice. You're pretty lucky that worked out, he muttered. The Weaver laughed. My choir is finally balanced, and your voice has seen some nice improvements. There's no fear of anything not working out. You'll find this will benefit you nicely. Clarence glanced at the back door, suddenly feeling a bit jittery, and she chuckled at his discomfort. What are the two of you off to do today? Fishing? That's good. Not in the bog, I presume? No, I have found the bog is not the kind of place to take a young woman. Clarence smiled, trying to keep his eyes from darting back to the door. That's a relief. I wouldn't say much of a place for a young man either. She raised an eyebrow at him. But you might be an exception to the rule. Clarence shrugged. Well, people back home would probably call me special, but you already know that. To his relief, the back door opened, and Piper appeared out from her doorway in a plain dress and apron. She looked lovely, the light from the window in the room behind her making a halo around her golden hair. Ready? Piper asked, walking up to Clarence, taking his arm. Relieved, he nodded at her. Quite. Good to see you, Weaver Constance. She waved him off, taking a seat at her table and emptying a basket of herbs for sorting. If you two catch anything suitable, I would be happy to cook it for dinner. If not, I'm making more stew and taro root. We'll be back in plenty of time. Well, we'll be back in plenty of time. We'll be back in plenty of time then, Piper said, grinning, as she tugged Clarence out the door. I don't know what voice to give Piper.
It's okay.
I enjoyed every second of that, like, auto-tuning. That's fantastic.
Because for a second I thought it was Clarence. I was like, we'll be back. It's like,
I'll be back.
Okay, I'm like, that's way too. Okay. Now we're at chapter 11.
What do you think? That was chapter 10. Any thoughts?
Well,
It was a nice,
No.
little, pleasant filler episode. With some
yeah, it felt
exposition.
shorter than the rest.
It was well, it was 2,000
I
words.
forgot that there was happiness in this book.
Thanks, Shayla. I appreciate that.
Thanks. That's going to build up the next two chapters really well.
Yeah, it was just a pleasant chapter.
Just really foreshadowing good things to come.
Yeah, lots of good
Things
things.
were finally looking up.
Guys, I need a synonym for confirmed.
Ratified.
They have thesaurus.
Oh, you're right. Like a day to day.
Verified.
Like
Ascertained.
verified, like confirmed.
Supported.
Discovered.
I don't know what to tell you. Why do you need that?
They knew of a surety.
There's a word that I just forgot. Validated. That's what I'm thinking
They
of. All right, continue on.
concurred.
I hate the word validated. Just
Do you
Oh, I do
not feel
too, but-
validated by it?
no, just because of modern culture and
It's
the internet.
really triggering.
It is. It's like, I feel so validated today. I killed a
demand
chipmunk with my car. Like, ah!
What do you
I'm just
No,
pulling
so
a random event
let me-
example from the internet.
Let me reword that for you.
Totally.
I feel so validated today. I hit a man instead of the chipmunk in my car.
That's also probably a quote from the internet. So it was a nice little filler chapter. Didn't distract too much from the main plot, I hope.
No. It made me inquire, what did Big Boss Daddy-O want in return, for helping out?
Oh, the
Right.
priest.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll get to
Yours.
that. We will get to that. Don't
I
you
want
worry,
your-
Brandon.
Clarence, I want your soul.
I want your soul. I mean, the good angel wants your soul.
Good angel. Good thing she already has it. She quite literally took it.
That's all of me.
She took all of you.
Okay. Well, and Joe, if you want to add any comments as you read or whatever, feel free. Same with you guys. If Joe's reading and something, just speak.
You mean like a thought?
Yeah, if you have a
Speak
thought,
to me.
feel free to speak it.
As long as it's
If
relevant,
you have
I'll
a
do that.
question,
I'll speak my truth,
Speak it.
Adam. Don't
If you
worry.
yeah, whatever.
No,
Just
no
let it
truth
go.
here.
Just let it go.
If we get too bogged up, I'll step in and kind of keep us going. If we get
Don't worry.
too bogged down.
I'm the master of digression.
I love digression. I'm going to add that word to my book.
So we digress. Anyways, chapter 11. Falling Island. A month of work and Clarence's cabin was finally complete. Though it wasn't a ranch house, it was a decent size. A one-story structure that was maybe 30 by 12 feet with 2 large rooms. It's okay.
Nice.
Nice. The help from the townsmen had greatly reduced the time it would have taken for Clarence to finish it. In addition to that, they were also just about done adding the roof to the new wing of the Good Angels Church, which was good, seeing as winter was setting in, and many of the men had been listening to the sermons from outside, standing by doors and windows. Now they at least would have a roof over their heads. Clarence ran his hand along a thin crack in the wall of his cabin and sang softly. The 2 logs grew towards each other, closing the gap between them with an airtight seal. He was careful to make sure the lines weren't too straight-looking, so a casual observer wouldn't notice how unnaturally close they all were. He continued for the length of the log, feeling the drain on his mana the further down the log he went. Manipulate Dead Flora was one of the new hexes he'd figured out in the process of building the cabin. It was incredibly helpful for things like this, but the mana cost was high. He didn't make it more than 3/4 of the way down the log before he was almost out of mana. It was a useful hex, though. At least for the chinks in the walls and doors. Windows were another matter. He couldn't figure out how to make the shutters tight and still open them, so he just stuffed them with bog moss, waiting until Ulrich or Dyron had the time to teach him how to properly install the shutters. Mana almost depleted, he grabbed up his carving tools and went out to enjoy the weather. It was a beautiful Sunday. There wasn't choir practice due to the weaver being out of town, and while he'd gone to church a few times with Piper, he wasn't going to make a habit of it. Clarence sat on a stump and started shaving down a bog cherry stave. Turns out, if any kind of wood stewed in the bog long enough, there was a large number of people willing to pay for it. Apparently, the bog enhanced the magical properties of the wood when druids worked on it. So Clarence was going to bury fresh staves in the bog and see how long that actually was. Interesting test theory. I would imagine it would take quite a while for that actually to have any effect.
Yeah, like 100 years.
Like wood petrification long.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if enhancing age would be something a necromancer could do.
Well, maybe if you could hydraulically press the bog mud around the object. I don't know. I haven't thought up the actual rules for it yet, but yeah, it would take longer than practical.
We haven't quite worked out the science yet. We're still in the medieval ages.
We can rebuild him. We have the technology.
We have the technology. That's my favorite one. He'd been surprised to learn that in addition to having one of the most prominent mills in the area, they also had one of the best broom makers. Mr. Calvers was a small, shrewd man who had been one of the first to come up to help Clarence with the cabin. Clarence had been collecting wood, branches, and logs that were buried in the bog around his cabin, and the second the broom maker had seen a small collection of bog cherry, he'd offered to buy the whole stack. At 3 coppers for fresh bog cherry staves, and a silver piece for well-aged staves that were buried in the bog, Clarence was finding himself with a good side hustle. I sell sticks.
Gotta get that side hustle in.
Gotta get that side hustle.
It's very sticky.
I do. Crunch time. Get isekai to crunch time. Real Sigma vibes. That was gross saying that. Forget I said that. A large shadow crossed his path. He looked up in time to see one of the massive bog oak's leaves drift down and touch the ground. The last of the leaves were still clinging stubbornly to the top of the trees despite it being early winter. A gust of wind rustled through the tall trees, and another handful of leaves followed, drifting down around him like big brown and red kites. Clarence got up from where he sat and walked over to where the first leaf had fallen. It was as long as his torso and in good condition. A perfect specimen to hang on his wall. He reached down to pick it up and saw a much larger shadow creeping towards him. Looking up, he saw the remarkable sight of a floating island drifting off in the distance, slowly cutting away the sun from the clearing below it.
It was
As
massive.
he watched it,
It wasn't massive, but
cue the Castle in the Sky music
I
from
need
Studio
the
Ghibli. Just
massive
wah.
Womp, womp, womp,
Give me
womp, womp.
15 seconds of that so we don't get copyrighted. Go, editor. Just right there. Perfect. Thank you.
I'm not doing it.
Who said you're the editor?
I'm the editor at this point for sure. If
The island was low, brushing against the tops of the massive trees as he watched a splintering crack echoed along the forest top of a taller tree wasn't flexible enough to bend under the pressure of an entire island in the sky and gave weight under the city. That couldn't be good. That would be something I would think. I'd be like, this is going to affect the trout population. As he took a few steps to the side, trying to see past one of the house-sized trunks, a bright green flash erupted from the island's top, purple smoke trailing behind it. A loud boom like thunder erupted seconds after the green flash. Then the island suddenly disappeared, dropping into the trees as the sounds of millennia-old branches snapping animated through the forest in percussive bursts. Kind of like Barracuda, just like dun 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 dun.
probably
It's all
should
branch
add
sounds.
big breaking sounds here. That would be awesome.
And glass shattering for some reason.
Yeah. Just imagine it. I don't need to edit it now if we just tell them what the sound should be.
Just imagine it.
Yeah,
guys.
but
Just
now we're
comic book
so
sound
far into
effect
telling them to
the-
imagine it that they've lost all the adjectives that describe what's actually happening to the castle, and they've
Stuff
been
broke,
jerked out of the
okay?
stories. So
Leave in the comments below what you think adjective means. I really want to know what's happened to society.
Your own moments.
Yes, because we did the percussive beats, bursts. Moments later, the ground beneath Clarence vibrated violently, and a torrent of leaves descended in the most encompassing, splatting suction sound ever heard, which I won't make the sound of. Clarence stood there in wonder and shock when he felt something wet hit his face. It was not a leaf. No, as he reached up to touch his face, more drops pelted down. It was mud. Oh, I was right. He stared at it in surprise for a brief second. A moment later, a small branch landed right next to him. Startling him out of his trance, he dashed for his cabin, abandoning the leaf as mud and sticks pelted his small clearing. The debris soon stopped falling. Clarence leaned out of his windowsill. His small clearing was covered in splintered limbs, leaves, and large splotches of mud. A flapping sound came from high in the trees. A group of mages flew overhead, robes whipping in the breeze. Their broom bristles crackled and hissed as they shot past. As soon as they came, they were gone. It's probably fine. A few hours later, Clarence couldn't help himself. He needed to see the crash. Couldn't keep his mind off it. He grabbed his pack and held his pulleys and ropes. Give me a second. Water break.
It is a funny sentence.
Joe,
Took
yes,
up his
it's not working.
axe and started to make his way through the bog.
Now, why would he go and do that?
Because he was curious.
He's curious, Brandon. He's curious about the fall. Wouldn't you be curious about a falling island?
That fell fairly close to yours.
I would be curious, but then
Your
I'd
first
also be
ability.
like, I'm going to be in their way.
Well, it's a few hours later. You know.
Yeah, they probably.
Yes.
You know, it's an entire. It's like a city-sized thing that fell out of the sky. They probably
Well, 2 football fields, but yes.
a 2-football-filled town fell out of the sky, and you know they probably took care of what's the word?
Business.
Business by then.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll definitely see. A few hours later, Clarence couldn't help himself. So he took up his axe and started to make his way through the bog. About a mile from his cabin, he began seeing some real devastation. Bog oak limbs the size of normal trees were scattered all around, littering the swamp's floor. It continued like that for a good bit, making Clarence climb over and through the debris. Clarence made it through the tattered mess and found himself standing in front of a giant muddy expanse. In the center was the tilted form of the floating island, partially buried in the bog. It was so much taller than the massive capital city. This island was about the size of 3 high school football fields. Piles of rubble rose up from the island, remnants of buildings once standing. There were only about 10 buildings that were still somehow upright, though they were still obviously damaged by the fall. The whole place was eerily silent. No signs of the mages that had flown over his cabin or any inhabitants that may have lived there. Clarence sat at the edges of the mud soup watching the island. There was no movement, no signs of life. Had it been abandoned? Were there giant abandoned cities just floating around in the sky? That seemed unlikely, but if so, the decimated city in front of him would be a prime example. The ground around the island was a mess, starting thick and muddy by his feet and gradually blending into something boggier and soupier where the island lay. Giving a final glance around, Clarence chanted softly, activating his Find Fauna spell. A log in the middle of the soup lit up bright as a Christmas tree, and the word Spiderwood appeared in his pop-up. Nice. The log was decent sized, but so big he couldn't pull it out with his tools. The prudent thing would probably be to go back and get Ulrich and the others, but the prospect of pulling his first spiderwood log out on his own prodded at him. That darn hubris gets him every time. Plus, the mages might send their own teams out to get any spiderwood unearthed by the crash. That's how you get spiderwood. You know, unused floating cities just send it
Yeet
in
them.
there.
Yeet
Just
them towards
yeet
the
them.
earth.
It's very economical.
You relocate the cities and you relocate the wood. That simple. Mind made up, Clarence placed his axe on the mud bank and pulled out a long, sturdy rope from his pack. He tied one end to a tree stump and began the long, wet struggle of wallowing toward the log. Halfway to the log, the mud became very soupy, and he sank down to his chest. He wasn't far from the log when the ground under him suddenly gave way. Clarence was sucked under the soupy mud. Heart racing, he gripped the rope tightly and began kicking wildly as he pulled himself up hand over hand. He managed to drag himself up to the air after a few terrifying movements. Sputtering, he immediately started making his way back to solid ground. Exhausted, he collapsed on the firm ground, panting. He was filthy, the mud and slime covering every inch of him. It was pretty clear that he wasn't getting the piece of spiderwood anytime soon, not without help. If he didn't bring his rope and pulley, that would have been a pretty early ending to the book.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been.
Good angel, I need to get another one. Clarence started to make his way around the island until he found a clear pool of water and rinsed most of the mud from his clothes and body. He looked over at the island and was surprised to see a body halfway buried in the bog. The legs were resting on the shore of the island, but the upper body was swallowed up in the soup. Clarence stood up to get a better look and saw the style of the man's tunic. An odd feeling turned his guts. A mage. But why would mages leave one of their own behind? Possibly there had been too many casualties to remove them all, but the eerie feeling wouldn't leave him. He grabbed his bag and turned to head back to his cabin. Good call. He would tell Ulrich about this in the morning. The big man would probably know how to safely retrieve the log. ... You know, bedtime. Nothing else will happen. It's just a random event of things. To be fair, if, like, Clarence is still experiencing new things every day, and he's like, I don't know how worried I should be about having a falling island in the bog, right? That could be normal. That might not be normal. I don't know.
It's true.
Gotta get those 8 hours in.
What do you think, Brandon?
Yeah, you're the thinker.
What do I think about what?
That night, Clarence.
Sleeping?
He was. That night,
Yes,
Clarence
yes.
woke to the sound of explosions and saw light flickering through his window, coming from the direction of the fallen island. He hesitated, caution warring and with curiosity. Finally, Clarence slipped on his clothes, still damp from the bog water, and fastened his axe to his belt. He picked up his pack and exited his cabin, following the flickering lights to the crash site. He stalked carefully through the bog. The island soon came to view, lit by green fire that was springing from 2, now only 4 standing buildings. He caught a glimpse of something black slipping behind the stone rubble, but he squinted to try and catch a better glimpse of it. Screams erupted from one of the burning buildings, dragging Clarence's attention away from the black sludge towards the building, from the black smudge and towards the building. The cries continued, sounding more and more desperate. Without a second thought, Clarence ran forward, skittering over logs and around fallen branches until he reached the edge of the mud. Crouching on an old stump, he placed his palm against it and began chanting. A branch burst from the stump and shot across the moat, boring its tip into the island. Clarence could feel the hit to his mana. He resisted the urge to check his stats window and see exactly how much mana he'd lost. The branch had grown to about the thickness of his thigh at the trunk, narrowing down to the thickness of his wrist at the other end. Clarence began walking across. The log started to shake, but it was now part of him. Clarence knew all the knots and little branches that had sprouted out from it as he had walked over it 100 times, as if he had walked over it 100 times. His feet hit the soft mud at the end without missing a beat. He was close enough that he could hear a woman's voice yelling through the empty streets. "Jack! Julian! It barred the door! The fire's spreading! I'm going to burn! Help! Oh, please, help!" With a quick glance, he ran the direction of the voice to one of the few standing buildings. Oh boy. Chapter 12. Safely Home. I don't recall that being the name of the chapter last time I read this.
I've changed
Flames.
the names.
Very nice. Very nice, Mr. Author.
Yeah, Adam's been going through and retroactively just putting up captions in the air above people's heads in these books that weren't there before.
Look, it's
Very
it's
nice.
better this way. I'm trying to find chapter names that don't give things away, but are like, oh my gosh, I get it after you read the chapter.
Chapter
Yeah,
13.
no, I'm not saying you're wrong.
Everything is
I'm just
definitely
saying.
fine. Chapter 14. Don't look in that door. Wink. Wink. Okay. Flames crept up the building from the back, and the roof was on fire. The front was yet untouched by the flames, but the windows were seemingly sealed shut, and a big boulder rested against the large front door. Placing his hand on the door, Clarence began to chant. A branch sprang from a knot in the door just behind the boulder, lifeless twigs popping out. He focused, drawing the branch against the boulder. With agonizing slowness, the boulder was slowly rolled away from the door and downhill a few feet. He groaned, pushing away from the door. It was another big hit to his mana pool. Clarence pulled on the handle and the door swung open, pulled away by the weight of a large limb that now stuck out of its front. He was met with a burst of smoke catching him off guard and sending him into a fit of coughs as he ducked. Despite the smoke, he entered the building, almost falling as his feet hit something soft laying on the ground. He heard the groan of a woman, and she coughed weakly. He reached down and grabbed her arms and started to drag her back until he ran into something solid. The door. Somehow it had shut. He pushed on it and it wouldn't budge. That's not a great situation. He muttered curse. His muttered curse turned into a cough as he inhaled a lungful of smoke. Don't smoke, kids. Gasping, he tried to hum, willing the door to move, fighting to force it out through the bouts of coughing. It stayed unmoving, and he cursed again. Knowing he didn't have much time, he changed tactics and rested his hand on the door, trying to weaken it. He thought of the soft, rotten wood of the deadfalls around his grandfather's ranch, their styrofoam texture. He pushed that thought into the wood, and it felt it creeping out until he felt it give way and the wood crumbled under his fingers. Deteriorate dead fauna. Hex type crude. You can now deteriorate fauna. End tutorial. Clarence brushed the rotted wood away, making a hole just big enough to fit his shoulders. I would also note that he needs to swipe his nose at some point here. Because if he does have
we'll just assume he does. I think it's implied.
I guess he does do that now. That's probably second nature to him at this point, where he's like, it's like those ads that you have to skip at
like
videos.
pop-up ads.
It's second nature. He's like, nah.
Yep.
Clarence brushed the rotted wood away, making a hole just big enough to fit his shoulders. Crawling through, he turned and grabbed the woman, dragging her through the hole. As he pulled her, he realized the boulder had somehow rolled back against the door. Something was very wrong. Boulders don't roll uphill. A wary eye on the boulder, Clarence deposited the young woman against the side of the building and quickly scanned his surroundings. Nothing moved. Everything seemed still other than the fire crackling behind him and the woman. She was young, somewhere between her late teens and early 20s, with hair white as the moon. Well, his moon, he corrected. Not this planet's black halo that was only visible during the day. The girl was gasping at the clear air, and she went into a fit of coughs as he came back to her side. She blinked at him blearily, her eyes red from the smoke, and she seemed confused when he reached down to help her up. Ignoring her confusion, he grabbed her hands, pulling her to her feet. Time to go. He grabbed her by her shoulders and started propelling her to his makeshift bridge. It was gone, with nothing but swampy lake surrounding them. The tingling feeling that had started when he saw the boulder turned into a roar, and he changed directions, guiding them to the inside corner of two broken walls. He pushed the girl into the corner and then pulled out his axe. Can you talk? He asked, scanning the darkness. Her response was a hoarse croak, and then more coughing. Finally, she cleared her voice enough to speak. When she finally did, her voice was urgent and filled with fear. We need to get out of here. Do you have a broom? It's going to kill us. I don't. What happened? Clarence asked. It took them. It killed everyone. I barely escaped. She went into another bout of racking coughs. What is it? He urged, not liking
the sound of.
You don't need the E. Not liking the sound of it killed everyone.
There's an E.
There's no E in liking.
Oh, you're right. There is no E in liking.
I fixed it.
Okay. I'm sure it'll update for me in a minute.
Maybe. Write in the comments below if it looks fixed to you. A beast created by the Necrokiller escaped. It'll kill us. She was clearly panicked. The Necrokiller? Clarence's heart dropped. What kind of creature? How am I supposed to know? I didn't make it. She coughed violently, hands spasming, and Clarence stood there watching her, fighting a feeling of overwhelming dread. He took deep breaths, trying to be calm. At worst, he'd expected to have a run-in with a couple mages. But the creation from a dead era? An era that had been ended because of things like it? He resisted the urge to gulp. You're a witch, right? You must know something, he asked urgently, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. It's been caged for 18 years. I don't know anything about it. If we knew how to destroy it, we would have, she said, her tone exasperated. Clarence sighed. Well then, we'll just have to wing it. What does the thing look like? But she was already shaking her head. You don't understand. I was locked in the building when it struck. I have no clue. She tossed a hand in the air. The other gripped her necklace tightly. Clarence wondered if it had a figurine like the good angels. Clarence wondered if it had a figurine like the good angel. Word.
You can do this.
Fig. Each episode is just showing my descent into madness. Clarence wondered if it had a figurine of the good angel like Piper's. Keep your eyes peeled, and if anything moves, let me know. He handed her his axe. It struck him how similar the situation was to the one with Piper. Not a great series of events to keep repeating. She took it and looked around. If we can make it till tomorrow, Albion and his people will be able to deal with it. We'll just need to make it till then. She did not seem confident in her words, scanning her surroundings like a deer knew the wolves were closing in. Albion? He did not need to run into the man who had won the war against the Necromancers, and he turned to the girl. Tell me, miss, if I got you a broom, could you fly us out? She looked at him and laughed, a wicked smile flashing across her lips and into her eyes. If you can somehow pull a broom out of thin air, I will get us so far from here at such speed you wouldn't believe it. Perfect. Stay
Bet.
here. Bet. He ordered... Dick. Quest objective obtained. He ordered and stay here.
Become
He ordered and
competent.
slipped around- Become competent. Get good. End tutorial. He ordered and slipped around the corner of the wall and ran toward the edge of the island. He hummed softly, scanning around the soupy muck for the components that made up a broom. Bog cherry, check. Willow bristles, check. One was close, a foot or so from the bank beneath the mud soup. Clarence stuck his fingers into the mud, feeling a cold, dead face. Next to it was the broom. Thank goodness. He
Fantastic.
didn't want to fly a dead body out of here. He pried away the dead
That's
fingers,
illegal.
freeing it. It's illegal to use a person to fly. Why was the person made out of
That
wood?
was an image.
I think it's funny that, well, right, because he's using detect fauna, not detect dead.
Yeah.
But that's really funny how it's like, I'm looking for wood. It's a face. Oh boy. Clarence stuck his fingers into the mud, feeling a cold, dead face. Next to it was the broom. He pried away dead fingers, freeing it. Then, the broom clutched in hand, he sprinted to the relative safety of the two walls. You got one, the girl exclaimed in disbelief. Clarence nodded, knowing how awesome he was, trading the dripping broom for his axe. She swung a leg over the broomstick, waving to him hurriedly. Get on behind me and hold on tight. If you fall off, I will not be coming back. Wow. So nice to her hero.
I love Susan.
Rude. Clarence scrambled on
sorry?
behind and wrapped
Wait,
his
did I
arm.
miss the name? I feel like I missed
no.
the name.
Shayla's doing
Shayla,
spoilers.
shh, spoilers, editor. You know
That's
what
not
to
a
do.
spoiler.
Where's the spray bottle?
Nothing.
Bad. Clarence gaped in disbelief as he heard an disanimated floating voice spoil the next part of the book, preemptively. But he scrambled on behind and wrapped his arms around her thin waist. It wasn't ideal. The broom was clearly designed for only one person, without the leather safety strap, quote unquote, the courier's broom had. Ah, nice. That's grammatically correct, but still fun to say had. And the stave was thinner than the courier's broom as well. With a leap, the witch took off, propelling them straight up into the sky. Clarence squeezed the bristles tight between his thighs and clung on to the small girl's waist. In mere moments, they were soaring high above the massive bog oaks. The broom quivered under them, and Clarence doubted it was designed to carry this much weight. Underneath the tree canopy, he thought he could see a shadow following them from over and around the island's rubble. He lost track of it as the witch pushed the broom to its limits. Clarence leaned over her shoulder. My cabin is about a mile to the south. You can drop me off there. You want to be dropped off? She yelled back. Yeah, I would rather you drop me off. Clarence had definitely decided he didn't like brooms. The one underneath them was giving little quivers, and he did not like the cracking sounds it was making. Fine, stop squeezing so hard, I can't breathe. She leaned slightly, changing her trajectory, and Clarence loosened his death hold around her waist, despite his brain screaming at him to hold tighter. Good times. So romantic. As they neared his clearing, the broom started to shake.
This is not what that
free from
is.
between Clarence's legs, making his grip weaker. He tried to sit perfectly still, terrified he'd lose his balance. even as the broom shuddered ominously. They were only a short distance from the break in the trees, and Clarence found himself leaning forward, as if that would help them break the distance. "The clearing there!" Clarence shouted urgently. The witch nodded in response. He could feel her body tense as she aimed the broom toward the ground, bringing them down past the large branches. The broom jerked under them, and he thought he heard the witch curse as she struggled to keep the broom in the air. Their final descent into the clearing had Clarence holding his breath, and just as their feet hit the ground, the bristles of the broom poofed into flame. Clarence jerked away with a surprised yelp, but the witch simply
I
turned
told
and hit
you,
the broom
Adam.
into the
I
dirt.
told you that was
And that
good.
didn't quite do it. She took to stomping on it, burning embers flying up into the air until the flames were out. She looked at the broom regretfully. "Definitely pushed it too far. It's been a while since I've torched a broom." I like that
Thanks.
the consequence of pushing a flying broom too hard is that it has spontaneous combustion.
Why did that make me think of like
That's awesome.
Warhammer 40K or
Thank you.
Helldivers, where the jetpacks they're designed to do one thing, and that's
The
make you
over-
go up. Use it too much, and you will come back down.
I told. I
There's
added that bit
consequences in this book.
Hold
Adam's
hold
feedback-
space to
I
go
added
up
that
until you
bit.
don't anymore.
Well, Adam's feedback was like, "How does that even work? What's the science behind it?" And I was like, "You have massive
Magic,
make-believe.
magic.
Like, give me this."
The fun part about fantasy is you can just say magic. and then
Well,
good.
well,
Magic.
there are some limits. It has to
no,
make
I
some
like-
sense, but yeah, Shayla was right. It works perfectly.
in the name
And I
of-
forgot that willow bristles, particularly, are really good at going fast, but they do light up. So that was my mistake for missing that. I mean, I knew the lore. I knew what was going on, but Shayla
It's like you wrote the
just
book or
corrected
something.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll have to ask a question by the end of this chapter because I'm confused.
Okay.
But I will. Looks like the broom has reached its limits, he said, nonchalantly, gazing off into the sunset. The witch looked down at the broomstick.
You were
lying on the
actually
ground.
at Clarence regarded her.
So it downs. No, he said.
No.
Oh,
You're at Clarence
where am I?
regarded her.
Clarence regarded her. Took a good once over. She was short, he realized, her head stopping well below his collarbone. That made him feel good about his self-image. She had a slight build, and he doubted she weighed more than 100 pounds based off of how easily she'd been to pull, how easy she'd been to pull out of the burning house.
Easy she had been. How
Easily
easy it had been to
it
pull.
had been.
He was a lightweight, and Clarence was buff as heck.
Not really.
Heckin' swole.
Easy
Clarence
it
is
had
kind
been.
of a
It's
lightweight
easily-
himself.
It's either,
He lifts logs for fun.
She's
She
it's either
she's a
how
small
easily
woman.
it was.
she's like 90
It's
pounds.
either how easily it was to pull her out, or how easy it was.
is that even healthy?
No.
That sounds.
She's short. She's
90
just small.
pounds?
She's small.
Okay.
She's a small lady.
Okay. A little lady.
Yeah. not very big.
She looked around the clearing, and Clarence pursed his lips. He didn't want her in the house, but the lingering scent of smoke in the air indicated there was no other option. Looks like the broom has reached its limits, he said. Thankfully. The witch looked down at the broomstick lying on the ground. So it does. She looked up at Clarence. She was clearly exhausted. Deep shadows ringed her eyes. It wasn't makeup. She didn't look emo on purpose. Well, we'd better get inside then, he muttered. Clarence led her into his cabin. Once they were safe inside, he barred the door and began latching shutters. After each window and the main door was secured, he latched the window in his bedroom. He returned with a lit candle from his desk. The witch sat on the floor with her back against the wall. She opened her eyes when he came back in, and she watched him as he sat down across from her, setting the candle between them. "You need sleep?" he asked. "I don't think I can. It might have followed us." She rubbed her black necklace between her thumb and pointer finger. Now that they were closer, he could see that it was a simple black chain with no pendant. Her rubbing was agitated, obviously a nervous habit. "We'll be fine," Clarence said. "I'll let you know if it shows up. You don't need to fall asleep, but it'll be good to rest." She bit her lip but nodded in agreement. Clarence let out a long breath, trying to settle his nerves. My name's Clarence, by the way. Susan, the witch said. Clarence grinned. It's a pleasure to meet you, Susan. I'll grab you a few blankets. Tomorrow I can take you to Garthulin. We're not far. Despite her insistence that she couldn't sleep, soon there was the sound of the me coming from her side of the room where she lay curled up in the blankets Clarence brought her. Maybe soft snores was a better choice. I was just trying that out. She looked like a child, he sighed. A child who'd probably try to kill him the second it found out who he was. He was tired of it. Clarence didn't move from his seat until the sun was just starting to rise in the east, but the sense of something at the edge of his clearing made him turn his head to the door at the same time. His notification.
Just try the bad sentence again.
But the sense of something at the edge of his clearing made him turn his head to the door, and the camera angle tilted a little bit at the same time his notification window popped up in view. The music also got more intense. Detect necromantic creature. Passive skill activated. End tutorial.
There's
Alarmed,
no music, just
he turned
FYI.
No, but like kind of like the violin, like that. Like
No, it's the Dutch angle.
yeah, the and like it zooms in like towards the door. Anyways,
Right.
alarmed, he turned his attention to this new sensation, though sweeping the nation, became aware of some monstrous thing circling the clearing. He crept over to Susan and gave her a nudge. It's here. He wouldn't say it that way. It's here, he whispered. Her eyes opened. She blinked twice, then sat up without the least appearance of grogginess. How close? What does it look like? It's in the woods just out of eyesight. I haven't seen it yet. He glanced at the shuttered window. How do you know it's here? He wanted to say, you see an angel from hell, who am I beginning to think is also a deity of this world, gave me a heads up through a video game notification window. But he settled for a shrug. Just a feeling? I lived in these woods for a while. Something's out there. Something. I can smell them. She pursed her lips, seemingly satisfied. Do you have a broom? We got a chance if we run. Clarence shook his head. Nope.
That worked so well last time.
I'm broke and brooms are literally the worst. So we're just gonna sit here and die? She didn't sound pleased. Clarence got up and started pacing. There's something under us, she whispered softly. After a moment, Clarence stopped pacing and looked at her sharply. She was sitting eyes wide, her expression pale. She gestured to the floorboards beneath them, and Clarence's eyes narrowed. She knew. How'd she do that? Oh, I like how you didn't actually mention what she's talking about that she knows.
We'll get
He
there.
motioned her to stay seated and walked over, pretending to listen. Great acting skills. Laying his hands gently on the floorboards beside her. It was good. Well-worked bog oak, and responded immediately to his hum. The wood sprang to life, shooting from the ground, wrapping itself around Susan. Clarence! She took a breath to scream, but he placed a finger over his lips and gestured outside, shaking his head. Clearly more afraid of whatever it was stalking them, she quieted, her face white and expressionless. Hang tight, and I'll take care of it, he whispered, in what he hoped was a reassuring tone before heading to the other side of the living room, where he rested his hands on the floor and hummed again. The boards shrank a little as he pulled them up, revealing a ladder to his cellar, and he quickly climbed down. There, planted in the earth, was a humanoid figure. Upon his approach, its head turned, facing Clarence, expressionless. The blood nymph. Clarence put a hand on the thing's shoulder while rubbing his nose. Its stats popped up. Reincarnated blood Bluknymph. Bluknymph. Bluknymph, level 3. Hello, I'm a level 3 Bluknymph. Mana charge, 50%. 1.5 ticks. Health, 77%. 50%. He had neglected charging the thing all the way after finishing the cabin, not thinking he'd need it again for a while. Certainly not to fight off some necromantic horde that'd come calling.
You always plug in your phone. You should have known this.
Always plug in your blood nymph. That's
He named his blood nymph Tesla. It takes about 12 hours to charge. Well, it's time to see what you can do, he muttered, patting it on the head and dismissing his notification screen. Go hide. Immediately, the blood nymph turned and scurried up the ladder. He could sense it leaving through the back and disappear into the trees, well away from the darker, more menacing force that came closer to the front of the cabin. Clarence climbed back into a cellar and went over to the witch. Her face was pale, but the look she gave him was steely with a hint of disbelief. How did you avoid them? She asked, glaring at him. Who? Who? Clarence asked distractedly as he picked up his axe, pulling out his
He
whetstone.
says, who?
The blade.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Like you don't know. The Mage Council. They devoted enormous resources to making sure every last necromancer was caught. Entire families have been wiped out, but you got away. How did you do it? Clarence frowned, sliding the stone along the blade, trying to zone her out. This was bad, very bad. He should kill her. It was the safest thing for him to do. He would have to put the axe in her head or shatter her spine at the base of her neck, but the thought of her lifeless body crumpled on the floor made his stomach turn. Dang, Clarence. Oh, that's a rough thought. A sudden movement from the front of his cabin pulled out his senses, and he turned towards the door. Then, pausing at the door handle, he turned toward her. I'll be back. I have to return some videotapes. Then he tossed the axe over one shoulder and walked out the front door.
GameStop
Getting
isn't
worse and
doing
worse by
so
the
good.
second.
Sorry, that's just a reference to a movie. Leave in the comments below if you understood what returning videotapes means. The shadows around the trees seemed to stretch into the clearing as a nightmare emerged. Stepping from the forest came what looked like thousands of rodents' bodies spliced together. It resembled a sock monkey, one that had been lost down a sewer drain after being patched 1,000 times. Tentatively, Clarence hummed, scanning the thing in front of him. He could feel thousands of little rodent bones encasing a human skeleton. Clarence began to sing, dumping his entire mana pool into the thing's head. The bone-breaking hex did, then didn't take hold. His mana was somehow redirected. Rodent bits burst from the thing's shoulder and were sprayed across the clearing. Attack! Clarence yelled. The blood nymph sprang from the forest, running at the giant monkey sock. Such a great description. It made it about 100 feet before it froze mid-stride, then crumbled before Clarence's eyes. Use tackle! It was super ineffective. It was in that moment he started seeing black dots popping up across his vision. Something strange had taken hold of his neck. He tried to fight against it, but couldn't tell how it was holding him. Nothing was touching him, only an awful gripping sensation that clung to his throat. As he sat there trying not to pass out, the rodent carpet parted across the head of the creature, an emaciated face appearing out of the atrocious mess. It was a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, long and narrow face scarred with a prickly 5 o'clock shadow. You almost got me, the man chuckled, seemingly amused. Didn't see that coming. He peered a little closer at Clarence, then with a grin, receded back into the mess of rodent fur and bones. Clarence swayed to the side, collapsing, his vision starting to dim. The last thing he saw was the man in the morbid monkey sock stepping over him and entering his cabin. Heck
Boom.
yeah.
Okay.
Evil monkey sock man.
Okay, that's the end of chapter 12. What do you think, Brand?
I do desire to acquire this book.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I want to read it.
Okay.
I wanted to read it
until
if I heard that tidbit
Until we're done reading it,
months
you
ago.
can't read it.
Okay, I will sell
No!
I will sell it to you.
We want you to
Yeah,
suffer.
I'll buy it. That's what I want to do. I want to buy the book.
Okay, just like Brandon and all you fans listening, you can find the link in the description below to the book.
At this point, for the
Yeah,
audience, the book is
Brandon,
on Amazon.com.
Brandon, just go to the link in the description right now.
There's
Just right now, just go for it. Do it.
The only
Bet.
reason why you're not reading
Bet.
the book is because you're not choosing to.
I didn't
Give it
know
this
if it
little
was
right
even
click.
available yet. Because
It's
I
not.
still hear talk of it being.
Brandon, it's not.
Well,
It will be once it's released, and we'll put the link in the
which
description.
it will be once this is released.
My confidence in the author has been shook
Look, Brandon.
because of the false information
Brandon.
just given to me
Brandon.
Very
about it being
misleading.
available on
Look,
I
Amazon
only
right
have to
now.
write 5 more chapters at the very end.
Yeah, he's not done
I'm
writing.
adding
editing right now.
How long
Yeah.
does it take to write a chapter a day, roughly?
5 years.
It takes
Awesome.
me. It takes me like a day to write a chapter.
So 5 more days.
But then I have to edit it twice and send it to Shayla.
And
Hot
then she
tooth
has to
swans
edit
along.
it.
So it's about 3 days per chapter.
And
We
then
need to
it
come
will
up,
be
we need to
published on
come up with a good
Amazon.
outro.
Oh yes,
Is
outro.
is it Thursday yet?
Is it Thursday yet? That's original, right?
Yeah. Is it
What?
Thursday after
Was it
Critical Role yet?
Thursday?
Perchance, is it Thursday?
Are you still awake?
I think if we
After
say,
listening to
"Is it
Critical
midnight
Role,
yet?"
have we got a podcast for you?
For you.
For you.
Are you all
Guys,
caught up on your
it's really is it Friday yet? Because the implication
Friday.
would be that we're done with the podcast.
Yeah, so we
Is it
record on
Friday
Thursday,
yet?
post on Friday.
No,
Never
we
mind.
record on Thursday, post on Thursday. But
Is it Friday yet?
if we say if
Editing.
it's Friday yet, the joke is that we stop the
We
podcast at
finally got it
Friday
done.
and we get quit.
Is it Friday?
But only
Are we
that we
done
do.
yet?
Exactly. I'm glad you got the
I
So
joke.
that should
I
be,
think-
should be what it is. Are we
Let's-
done
let's-
yet? It
let's-
should just
are we
be,
done
Are we
yet?
done yet?
Are we done yet?
Are we done yet? See you next
Are we
week.
done yet? Okay,
I think it's
I am
funny
done.
that-
So adios.